Hey everybody, welcome back. It's your co-host again, Lindsay Baker, and I'm here with Kevin Powell from the GSA. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi.
Hi. So Kevin is the Director of Emerging Building Technologies at the General Services Administration, and I thought he would be a perfect guest for this particular conference because I have a feeling we have a lot of folks from the real estate world who are wondering how exactly one is supposed to introduce new technologies into a real estate portfolio. And there are a few people in the world who know as much about that as Kevin. So I think it's going to be a pretty fun discussion. Kevin is open to questions, so if you want to put those into the chat, we'll try to get to them. But I have some questions myself, and we're going to start with those and see where it takes us. So I think, Kevin, if you can just start off with telling people a little bit about what it's like to work at the GSA. It's such a unique, entity in terms of real estate that I think it would be good for people to have a sense of context.
Sure. And so first of all, I want to thank you, Lindsay, and CREtech for inviting me to talk with all of you. Super excited to do that. I think that the first thing is to just sort of say a few words about who GSA is. I myself kind of didn't really know when I took the job, and I had some ideas about what GSA and what the federal government was about that were actually quite wrong, to be perfectly honest. So first off, GSA is the landlord for the civilian federal government. That means all of the federal buildings, all the buildings that people associate with the government outside of post offices are essentially managed by GSA and on behalf of the taxpayer. So that actually is a lot of space, right? So there's 1 million plus people that are working in that space. There's 380 million square feet of that space. That really makes GSA the largest commercial real estate entity in the country. So it's a pretty big scale.
Yeah, no big deal or anything.
Yeah, no big deal at all. There's in fact, I got to say, I find it, I sort of remind myself, even in a talk like this, about just how big that scale is. And it, even after 15 years, still surprises me because it is just so much. It's so vast. And then the other thing I'd say is that, first of all, honestly, I do think I have the best job for me. It's impossible to imagine a better job. How many people really get to go into work and really shape the future of their organization in a truly meaningful way, in a way that resonates with, I'd say my skill set. I'm fundamentally a nerd, I think. At heart, I'm an architect. I've always been into building technology. That's what I focused on when I was in college. And really my job is essentially to drive adoption of emerging building technologies at GSA. So basically by providing a one-stop shop where companies that have something innovative can bring it forward to the agency, we try it out, we see if it works in the real world of our buildings, and for those that that actually prove out, we invest in those. And the other thing I'd say about GSA specifically, the federal government more broadly, is when I took this job, I actually thought of it as a stepping stone to another job, and that is truthfully why I took the job. I was just amazed at the talent and forward-thinking approach of people who worked at GSA, and that's why I've actually stayed and continue to do what I do. There's the thing about that people don't necessarily realize about the government is that the reason people work there is that it's mission-driven, right? It's not profit-driven, it's mission-driven. And so our mission is to deliver the best workplaces possible for that civilian federal workforce to do their work in. People take that from top to bottom really seriously, and that everybody is rowing essentially in that direction. So it's a great opportunity for me, and hopefully that's the perspective I'll be able to share with everybody here, to essentially help with that mission via innovation, via the kind of innovations that make buildings more efficient, more effective, and just generally better places to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll testify to that, that I've always been really impressed that the GSA is really leading on, I mean, there's a lot of publications that the GSA puts out about the future of workplace and about, optimizing buildings, all of these things. We'll talk more about some of the stuff you actually publish, but it's just worth saying, if you weren't aware that the GSA is probably ahead of you on these things, then now you are aware. So in particular, I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about why your program needs to exist around sort of the, sometimes difficult process of getting new technology into real estate, so that we understand that aspect of it a bit better.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure how familiar this audience is with the way investment in new tech works, but to just sort of briefly summarize it, there's a lot of resources that are available to companies, both large and small, when it comes to basic research and applied research. And there's a whole ecosystem of incubators and universities and actually R&D departments in large companies, and of course startup kind of visionaries. And there's a lot of ways for folks to essentially figure out the way to make that essentially the best thing since sliced bread. Well, to figure out how to slice the bread, there's a lot of resources there. But the reality is that as you move further along that readiness level, so you're moving from basic research, applied research, proof of concept, and now you're actually got a working prototype, you actually have a small production line going, there's really not a lot of resources. People are assuming that the resources are you're selling into the market. I heard on the last call, or towards the end of the last call, somebody was talking about the challenge of nobody ever got fired for specifying IBM, and that really is a broad and true statement. So when you're talking about something as large as a building, as expensive and long-lasting as building equipment, and of course a scenario where tenants are the whole reason that you're in business and you want to be satisfying them on some very basic things, there's some reluctance to try out something different. So if you had something that was working, why wouldn't you continue to specify what was working? And what we're saying is, in fact, there's something better out there and you should be buying this instead of that. Well, the way to do that, and the most effective way to do that, is to actually try these things out and to have one sort of place that you can do that. And the scale, this is what's unique about GSA, is that we have the scale to do that. So when you have 380 million square feet of space, it's not a big deal to take a small little test bed of 10,000 square feet and try something out, or try it out across, maybe several million square feet of space if that's what it takes. And the amount of investment in our program relative to the overall operating cost of that portfolio is small. So for that reason, we are able to maintain this program even in really, quite frankly, challenging financial times. I don't think anybody here would be, everybody gets it basically. There's a declining amount of money to run the federal government. We all understand that. This program continues to deliver value because we deliver savings so far in excess of the cost of the program.
Yeah, and it strikes me, I should also probably just ask you even a more simple question, which is like, can you describe what the people apply, and just so that people have a sense and the name of the, because I take this for granted, because for all disclosure, my previous tech company was in the program and we loved it and had a great experience. But tell it so that everybody knows it is an actual well-defined program with a set of sort of gates and things.
Yeah, super well-defined, so thank you for that, Lindsay. So first of all, just broadly speaking, The Center for Emerging Building Technologies, which is this program that I run, has two parts to it. One of them is called a proving ground. One of them is called pilot to portfolio. The idea of, basically the proving ground is a series of steps, and I'll describe those in a second, that lead to a result. And if the result is positive, then the pilot to portfolio looks to direct investment, agency investment. And if you're looking over there in this proving ground piece, there's an annual request for information, which will be published. Our current one, topic areas are changing each year. Our next RFI will be published next Monday. I encourage anybody who is on this call who's interested in learning more to go to gsa.gov/GPG. The topic is going to be resilient, efficient, and healthy buildings. So again, a huge and interesting technology space. We might talk a little bit more about that if there's time at the end. But RFI comes out, best ideas out there, submit them. We encourage you to submit them. It's a very low level of effort where we try to keep it to for the government, as streamlined as possible while maintaining full transparency. Third-party experts score those submissions. We have a technical committee that evaluates the semifinalists that come from that scoring for their applicability to the topic area and to our portfolio based on their knowledge. I would say, just like in the university, they always say, oh, everybody, we would have liked to have admitted everybody, we could only admit you or something like that. I feel that every year, pretty much every semifinalist would be worthy of being in the program. We select a handful, literally 5. We take those somewhere between 3 and 7, actually on average 5. We take those technologies and we install them, what we would say, in the minimum quantity needed to come up with a generalizable result. And I stress that because it's a real art form. We're going from one to many. We're saying we're going to install it, let's just say, in one place, and yet make a conclusion that says this would be relevant to potentially 9,000 places. So there's that goes on. We use national labs to do these validations. They're super expert at doing them. It does take a bit of time. We like to say the minimum amount of time necessary, but that minimum amount of time might be an entire year if you need a season's worth of data. In fact, like we did with you, there's some cybersecurity hurdles, which again, from our experience, we learned a lot about, because that's part of what these field validations really ring out, right? There's just there's stuff that works on the bench, but then there's a whole leap that you got to make to have it be something that fits within traditional supply chains and operator environments and real world kind of messiness, let's just say.
And there is a lot of messiness, and I think for those entrepreneurs out there, if you're working on something, I think that is one of the things I got most out of being a part of the program with Kevin was that it's not just the question of whether your technology is able to save a certain number of kilowatt hours of energy. It's whether you could quickly train somebody to go problem solve or troubleshoot something when it goes offline, or how long that takes to resolve, or just the portfolio of buildings that you have access to is a much more diverse portfolio. So in some ways, it's also about learning just how widely applicable is something. If you applicable doesn't necessarily mean that will shake out. So I could talk about this, but I would love to hear more of your thoughts about what highlights you've seen of what the tech companies learn when they're participating in your program. What are some of the things that you think, I don't know, maybe the most common insights that they get out of participating that you've seen? And then I think, one way of putting this is sort of the crossing the chasm phase, right, of tech startups. Sometimes it's not always startups, bigger companies do it as well, but that point, as you said, from when you've got something and it's worked in a couple of situations to true scale. So what do people learn? What are some of the things that surprise them or that surprise you in that process?
Well, I'd say that the first thing that never ceases to surprise me, and I think does never ceases to surprise most companies, is something that we say that every building is a snowflake. And if you think about what that kind of means, is that, of course, all snowflakes are snowflakes, right? They all look like they're the same, and yet when you go and study them, they're all unique. So what people would go out and say, we have a really pretty homogeneous portfolio of buildings. There's a few different types, but really, generally speaking, it's all office space. And you would sort of think that means that it's kind of consistent. It's actually not consistent in the least. And it's those little variations, that uniqueness, that snowflakeness, that tends to trip a lot of things up, because they, and I think actually this is the other side that I'd say is, it's been a learning for me for sure, which is that, we've had 78 different companies participate in the program. And I think, well, I can say for a fact that all 78 companies had a technology and have a technology that absolutely works under optimum conditions installed by their own lab-coated person. When it comes to installing in a real-world setting, operating in that real-world setting, there's almost always some surprises that it just does not work as you think it will work. And I mean, in fact, I'd say probably as much as a quarter of the technologies in some way or other just don't really work easily in essentially an operating environment. And it's sort of things, there's some things that are just like even the most trivial little thing can trip up really a massive, complicated thing. And just as an example of this, just to sort of to make this real, we were looking at electrochromic glass, right? Glass that can be clear or can go to several different kinds of tint states based on an electric charge. Now, the chemistry in this is remarkably complicated, and all of this sort of essentially effort went into how do you actually create that kind of ability to shift, and how fast can you do it, and a host of things like that, and a lot of validation about what that would do relative to thermal performance, relative to glare, and so on. So the company had a lot of resources in all of that. On the other hand, there's like a connector that you gotta basically ultimately connect that glass to, essentially there's just some wiring that has to take the glass out of the glass and into essentially the building to get to a box to be able to control the glass. Well, that wiring had never been thought through by that company. And so as we installed it, there were a host of problems, and ultimately most of that glass didn't really work or didn't work right. A bunch of it actually failed because of those connectors. So, I mean, we're talking, it's almost like when not this is a terrible sort of analogy in some ways, but, there was that whole thing about how that space shuttle blew up because of a little O-ring, right? It's just a tiny little O-ring, super complicated, mission out there into space, and one little rubber O-ring did the whole thing in. Same kind of thing frequently happens actually with these technologies. It's that unexpected little tiny component that just wasn't in your vision that can trip things up. And ringing that out, because your original question is, well, what do companies get out of this? Well, that's what they get, right? So that the difference between that basic research that says this is, at a little, sort of tiny little scale, this is actually going to work. Yes, right. How do you make that work in a way that's fully commercialized? That's part of what you learn.
Yeah, that's a very good example. And yeah, I remember we learned a lot of those same kinds of things. So yeah, okay. So I have one question about that, so like the flip side of that, which is what have been some of your favorite moments or favorite like success stories that you think are worth sharing, to any degree of specificity, or things that were sort of happy discoveries for you for your portfolio?
I'd say for us, probably for GSA, and I just want to say that this really is the perspective for GSA. May not work for everybody. Your mileage may vary and that sort of thing. There's a technology out there that is what's called a magnetic bearing chiller. Now, it seems like a prosaic piece of equipment, but it's a huge piece of equipment. It's the largest single energy consuming piece of equipment in any building, is this big, giant air conditioner. And there was a very reliable technology that everybody was very comfortable with, and was constantly replacing like for like. A small startup company from Florida figured out how to rethink this compressor. Instead of using traditional bearings, actually use magnetic levitation. Sounds cool. Freaked out those kinds of facility operators, because when you're sort of saying, oh, this is something that requires computer control, magnetic levitation, micron of gap between the rotor and the side of the thing, I mean, that doesn't sound reliable. I don't want to try this out. So a lot of resistance. We actually, and again, this is kind of a sort of a funny sort of thing that we sort of do this on occasion. We took somebody who was very, very skeptical, and convinced his leadership that they should try this out, that our demo, our test bed should be in this guy who was probably one of the most vocal and skeptical people about technologies more broadly, this technology more specifically. We put it in his building. And then lo and behold, this thing, again, it's sort of, again, that same kind of unexpected consequence sort of thing. So we had thought, well, this is going to be great because it's going to save energy because it's more efficient in how it rotates. Well, it turns out that there's another piece to this as well, which is that it's really quiet. It doesn't have a lot of vibration. Suddenly this machine room that was, you had to wear hearing protection, you don't have to wear the hearing protection. So these guys love this piece of equipment for that reason, not so much for the energy efficiency, which it also delivers, and not so much for the change in maintenance that is actually kind of appealing, but really it's this just side benefit. Like there's no return on investment on something that's quiet and vibration free, but that's really what drives these guys to love it. And then also it's kind of I don't want to say it's like more fun to drive, but it is essentially more fun to drive. It's easier to operate in kind of some cool ways that people have wanted to do, that actually do save more energy, but again, really, anyway, you get the idea. So I'd say that would be the happiest, but there's we have one right now that we call a building operating system that I'd say is we may end up talking about it more, but we should probably move on.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, my next question is whether you'd like to see anything on applying, whether it's this year or any year, things that I guess you could approach this in a couple of ways. You could just put your nerd hat on and say, like, what stuff do you think would be really cool if someone would invent? But then the other question, which I know a lot of people want to know, is what are your biggest pain points that are unaddressed for your portfolio that need innovation applied to them?
Yeah. So I'd say that so to me, a huge well, everybody out there, I'm assuming in this audience, has you must have heard of something that people call Internet of Things. And so Internet of Things, what does it really mean? Well, it just means that all of these essentially pieces of hardware that are out there, and it's just anything that is essentially got more or less a computer. Like computers are essentially everywhere. So there's an internet connection, essentially an IP communication protocol that's associated with a lot of stuff. And all of that stuff can be put onto a single network, like computers can do. And the thinking from this, and this is the idea again of another term people probably heard about, is like it's a smart building, it's a connected building, it's a connected home if you're in that space. But obviously we're in a commercial space. So we have these connected smart buildings. We've got this Internet of Things stuff. And we should be in this extraordinary place that would be like the beginnings of, what the laptop, computer, and smartphone were for us as consumers, where everything is available everywhere in a seamless, easy to use way. Unfortunately, the way it really is up to now is kind of like the earliest days of computers. And, I don't know how many people go back to this, but it used to be really hard to connect up just a computer to a computer, right? The idea of a network and the idea of like installing drivers and making anything work with anything was kind of complicated. Well, that's where we're at with a lot of this smart building technology, right? It could do all of this, but it just can't because it's so hard to configure. So the biggest pain point to me is that, right? It's that lack of interoperability. It's a lack of plug and play. It's a lack of standard connections so that you can swap out certain components. If you are buying a light fixture that might last for 20 years, but you have a sensor that really is only good for 3, you want to be able to replace the sensor. You can't do that at this point, right? There's just all of these little things like that. So that to me is the biggest pain point, and the biggest opportunity. And then I think we're actually at the sort of like right there. I can see it. I can just see it, that we're going to get over that hump. And when we do, then, and that's kind of where, and again, coming back to our resilient, efficient, healthy buildings request for information from this year, our advanced energy management information system from last year, which we now call building operating system. What these actually are grid interactive efficient building, or GEB. Actually, that was last year. The EMIS was the year before. Sorry, they all flow together. But these things are really exciting because we're going to essentially be able to operate buildings in ways that work so much better for the people in them, are so much more efficient just within themselves from a cost basis, and that actually work much better with really where the grid is headed, where our electrical grid and electrification is going.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture, and I'm so ready for us to be in that state of all of these things working more dynamically. We have a couple of questions before we wrap up. One, I think, is more of a clarifying question. It's about whether the Proving Ground looks at like construction materials, innovative construction materials, and things like that. Or is it more technology embedded stuff? So in particular, they're asking about engineered timber or engineered, like mass timber, bamboo kinds of stuff.
Right.
What's the scope, I guess?
So the scope of the program, and if you think about the scope of just opportunity in general, is really around retrofit and renovation, and not so much around new construction. There's a host of reasons that are really specific to GSA. We're not really investing a whole lot in new construction for a lot of different reasons. And there's an enormous opportunity around renovation, and retrofit. Specifically, we would say that engineered timber, which I think is the coolest thing ever, and I would love to be able to have some sort of project around that, that's out of scope.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks. And then the last question is about a company that was accepted into the program but ran into issues around not being applicable enough across building types, and so they didn't finish the program. And I don't know if it's them, but someone is wondering whether companies ever reapply when they've become more applicable than they were before. So, like, do you have people that have somehow gotten in the second time? Or maybe if they might be looking for some general guidance about whether that's the kind of thing that could happen in the program.
I would say the answer to that is yes. And when you sort of look across all of these submissions that have happened to the program and where things have gone, I'd say that first of all, going back to your original thing of what did people get out of the program, well, almost I would say every one of these companies that has been in the program has learned something to improve their technology delivery. I would say that a surprising number of these, again, not a huge number, but I'd say about 10%, maybe even heading towards 20%, end up declining to commercialize the technology, fully commercialize the technology, because they've learned it just actually isn't going to work in the kind of space that they thought it would, or it won't really deliver the return on investment that they had hoped for. And then I'd say there's another handful of technologies that actually discovered they're not fully ready, and that they, again, I think that's what this question was, is like, should you come back? And we have actually in the program at this time, the very first, actually we have two that are currently in the program that have come back, right? They, in one case, got spun out of a big company. Again, that big company decided there wasn't really, they didn't see, actually they were selected. We moved forward. We'd actually found a test bed for them. And then they said, you know what, we're pulling the plug on this. And then they got spun out. It took another 2 years. The company came back, said, actually, we have a whole new structure and investment and everything else. We've modified things. We've reshaped our value proposition a bit. Would you consider resuming this test bed? And the answer is yes. And we're actually underway on that. That's a DC microgrid. And then there's a second one, which is a sub-metering technology that was, again, really interesting. It was accepted. It actually had a successful field demonstration with a utility, but they recognized and again, this is, I think, what companies do get out of these kinds of demonstrations. They recognized after they had gone through that utility demo, but before they participated into our program, they really didn't have a path to manufacturing this at scale at the price point that they wanted to be able to hit. So they essentially reworked their product. It's taken them 4 years, and they have come back and said, so would you consider this again? And we said, absolutely, let's go with it. And in fact, we've kind of reconfigured how that can go. But again, we consider, once you've been accepted, we assume that there was a basis for that acceptance. And if there was some reason that had to put you on pause, we'll put you on pause. There's a number of evaluations that have been inconclusive. And we usually will give companies an opportunity to come back after an inconclusive evaluation if we think there's a lot of promise to come back with something that is, again, a version 2.0 that addresses, or in many cases, it's just GSA's challenge, right? There is something unique about that facility. We had one where they thought it could go with an advanced BAS. As it turns out, it really can't. It needs a pretty basic scenario. So we installed it at the wrong location because nobody understood some of these sorts of things. We said, do you want to do this again? They said, no, actually, we don't. And to the best of my knowledge, again, they've never commercialized that product. I probably made some internal decisions. I could go on. Every one of these, I feel like, is a child in a certain way for me. I love all my children equally, but some perform better than others.
Well, that is actually a really lovely way to wrap up. I hope everyone is taking this lesson out of this session, which is that if you can manage to get through the application process, working with Kevin and the GSA is probably going to be one of the most helpful and hopefully parental clients you will ever have. And, in a good way. And I hope we have, frankly, more folks out there who are willing to go to some of the efforts that you all go to. So thank you for your work, and thanks for being here.
I just, because I got to put in that plug, shameless self-promotion here. GSA.gov/GPG. There's all of the results that the program has ever published are there, because we're completely oriented towards transparency, towards sharing. We're funded by the taxpayer, so we want to give back to the taxpayer. And then our other, thought process here is that we really hope to be able to, in some ways, make markets, right? So if it works for us, we hope it will work for you. And if there's more volume of purchasing, there's a lower price for everybody. So that's part of, again, there's a few different reasons why we publish stuff there. And then also, again, gsa.gov/GPG. That's where we will post this request for information on Monday, October 5th, which is how you would, if there's anybody out there who says, I really know of this technology, I'd really love to see that tried out in an operating building. Recommend to those guys that they participate in this program. You're accessing, actually, it's a joint program with Department of Energy, so it's not just GSA, but it's all of the commercial building sector, because Department of Energy will connect you up with some private entities that we're also test bedding these same things. And again, it's resilient, efficient, and healthy building technology solutions.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you.
Yeah. Thanks for doing it. It's been great. I hope everybody learned a lot. Thanks, everyone. Take care.